There you go.
Oh.
You're just going to have to stand up and look at it every so you might be able to angle it just a little.
Oh, yes.
executive session before the meeting regarding personnel matters. Mr. Saul, would you recognize all members present except one? Read notice of the meeting, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Notice of special meeting. A special meeting of the Toursville Area School District Board of School Directors will be held on March 30th, 2016 in the Toursville Area High School Auditorium on North Arch Street in Toursville, PA, starting at 7 o'clock p.m. The purpose of the meeting will be for discussion of the 2016-17 budget, as well as any and all action that may come before the board. Anyone attending the meeting who requires assistance or special physical and/or communication accommodations should contact the district office prior to the meeting. Already saw secretary. This was duly advertised and was to run on Saturday, March 26, 2016.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. At this time, I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to include vote on the agency to hire to search for a superintendent, and also to amend it to consider candidates to fill the empty board seat. Do I have a second? Second. Questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Snell. The first one is to make a decision on what agency to employ to conduct the superintendent search?
Yes.
Okay, we just received that information within the last hour. And I realize time is of the essence, but I think we need a little time to read through the information we were given. I'm absolutely not prepared to make that decision so quickly.
Mr. President, I would concur with Mr. Ruffing. The one presentation was rushed because the first one had ran over. I agree with Mr. Ruffing. This is a very important decision. It does take priority, but I believe we have a meeting Tuesday. Is that correct? And,
What's our next meeting?
well, is that 2 weeks? That's too long? 2 weeks.
What, 2 weeks?
2 weeks.
No, I don't think so.
It's
We're talking about April 12th.
yes.
Yeah, I'd like to table the motion.
I second it.
That's just the first part.
I'd like to withdraw that part of the amendment for the vote on the agency to hire the superintendent. I could withdraw that part of the amendment, but leave the second part of the amendment in the motion.
Okay, I have an objection to the second part of the amendment to make a decision tonight on the person to fill the empty board seat. We have not had, excuse me, we've not had an opportunity to interview. I believe we only have 2 candidates. Is that correct?
That is correct so far.
I feel that we need an opportunity to interview them, both of them in a public meeting, preferably side by side, and the ability for all board members to ask them questions. We have not done that. We have not even met these 2 applicants. So I think that we are not prepared to do that this evening.
Didn't we advertise it until April 1st as well?
And the window for applicants is still open until through Friday.
Yes, and if we've only had 2 applicants, and we can still vote on those 2 applicants.
And if someone were to apply tomorrow or Friday, what would we tell them? you tell them?
They should have applied sooner.
But their opportunity to apply is through the close of business on Friday as you advertised it. So to make a decision and make a choice this evening, when people still have roughly 48 hours to apply the next 2 days, I think that would be unethical.
Well, I think, as far as your unethical part, I disagree with you. I think that there's been adequate time, and we are under a time constraint here. And to have another meeting to vote on it, we do not have that time. So I would move that we add it to the agenda to make a vote tonight. We all got resumes, we all got a letter of intent from both candidates, and you all had time to read that. You've had over a week to read that. I think that's plenty of time.
I think there's something different between taking a look at a piece of paper that has the qualifications on and actually interviewing them in person. I think it would give us a better perspective of candidates. I would feel more comfortable doing that.
I would have felt more comfortable with that too, but the time constraints we're on isn't going to allow that.
It's not the way, I've never gotten a job by just submitting something on a piece of paper. Everybody looks good on paper. It's not the way to do it.
Well, first of all, I don't think either one of the applicants are stranger to anybody on this board.
They are to me, at least one of them is. One of them is. I would like to see these two applicants before the board and available to ask questions and to be scrutinized. That's the way you hire somebody. That's the way it's done. If we're out of time, if time is running out, that's too bad. But that's the way it should be done.
I'm sorry, Bill, I disagree.
I'm sorry, Ron, I disagree with you.
Mr. President, the only distinction I would make is, yeah, it's a job, it doesn't pay very much, but it's a little bit different than a private employer and going for a job where you're going to be paid a salary. I understand Mr. Ruffin's point. I'm more concerned with the time constraints. My understanding is the 3rd is a Sunday. That's the time frame that we're working within.
I don't necessarily agree that that's a time frame. The 30-day time period should run from the date that the resignation was accepted.
But school board policy dictates something else, correct?
Yeah, but I don't know that the school board policy really even applies to this.
Is it possible we could get into litigation if we were to appoint somebody and then come to find out?
Well, as I mentioned to Ron, to be on the safe side of it tonight, if you're comfortable. But I don't, the law doesn't force you to, in my opinion.
I think we should go with Mr. Landon's advice and guidance. He's well paid by the district. Certainly we should know what he's talking about.
It all boils down to how much risk you want to take. I mean, if you want to be safe, do it tonight, but I don't think that the law necessarily requires it.
Mr. Landon, would there be an issue if there was a vote tonight and someone tomorrow said, well, I would like to have been considered in the paper, it's advertised until April 1st, would there be any legal ramifications? I don't know.
No. Once the board makes a decision, the decision is made.
Mr. Landon, I got a question. Can we vote to set aside that board policy for a period of time?
Yes, because the law clearly says you have 30 days from the date it's accepted, so, yes.
All right, then,
What day would that put it at?
it'd be 30 days from last Tuesday,
No, it's the 21st, 22nd.
30 days from the 22nd.
Absolutely make a motion to suspend the policy for purposes of this particular.
All right, I'll make a motion to suspend the policy, and it's policy, I think it's 400. For the purpose of this vote, we will suspend that policy temporarily. Second. Questions or comments?
Yes, and then that would put us at the date that we would have to make this decision on the board replacement. That date would be
On April 21st.
The 21st of April.
by the 21st. Would we have a meeting on April 12th? Could we expect to make it on April 12th? Or is that question premature?
You could have a special meeting anytime up until the 21st.
Okay. I want to be sure that the entire board has an opportunity to have these applicants stand in front of the board to be asked questions.
Okay, but if that's what you want, that's fine, but it would be one at a time, and one applicant wouldn't be in front of, or in hearing distance, while the other one's getting questioned.
I think that's an excellent idea.
Any more questions or comments on the motion to suspend temporarily the board policy? And I believe this is 004. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I will withdraw my motion to add the vote on the agenda. Now we're going to move to miscellaneous matters.
Action items, Mr. Snow?
I was going to do that last.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, you have received a presentation that I'm about to do, printed into place. I'll also be projecting on the screen. I don't know if you want to turn around, have a seat, and talk around. Okay, you have to excuse my back. I'll try to turn Any board members that have questions that I'm going through, please stop me and ask them whenever you care to. If you try to wait until the end, you may not remember at the end. So try to hit those as we go along. So this is the 2016-2017 general fund budget. Presenting this today. A real quick overview. So this is what you're going to see as we go through the budget, but these are the highlights. This is a draft general fund budget. It's not a preliminary budget, not a proposed budget, not a final budget, it's a draft. It's the first iteration, if you will, of the budget that we're presenting to you this evening, and it'll be a work in progress. It'll be fluid as we move through the next few months. This is a balanced budget. It proposes a 0.32 mil real estate tax increase that shouldn't be a huge surprise to anybody because this is part of the funding plan for the high school building project, so this number should be very familiar. It proposes a $209,000 transfer to the Capital Reserve Fund. And this is the net result of that funding plan we talked about, or we will talk about a little bit here in the future. It contains a $600,000 budgetary reserve line item. We have a board policy that indicates there should be between 2% and 10% set aside for budgetary reserve, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. It also uses $405,600 from the committed fund balance. This is money we set aside in the past to help mitigate the increases to the pension, the school district's pension payments. The way we'll work through this is we'll start with the revenues. We'll talk about the revenues and the various types. We'll move on to the expenditures, and then we'll talk a little bit about fund balance and some of those other features that you saw on the first slide. Very broad, there are three categories of revenues. There are local revenues, state revenues, and federal revenues. Local revenues, as the word implies, are revenues that are generated or collected within the boundaries of the school district. Real estate taxes, per capita taxes, we don't have those anymore, that would be an example. Tobacco fines, anything that's generated locally. State revenue is money that comes to us from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and federal revenue is money that originates from the federal government. There are several different categories of local revenues. First is current real estate taxes. I think we're all familiar with those. Interim real estate taxes, which are levied on new construction. So this is where a new home may not show up on the tax rolls when they're generated in July, and they're billed on an interim basis to assess or to tax that new construction. Public utility realty taxes. These are for like public utilities that don't pay taxes. This is money you get in lieu of the tax money you would receive from those public utilities. Payments in lieu of taxes, these are this is monies that come from the state that would be in lieu of taxes that you might get from state game lands. So we get money from the Game Commission and the Fish Commission. Earned income tax is a tax on earned income on wages. That's assessed in our district at 1.15%. Real estate transfer tax, each time you transfer a parcel of real estate, you pay 0.5% to the school district on that real estate transfer transaction. Delinquent taxes are the taxes like real estate that are turned over if you haven't paid by the close of the period in December 31st. Here we turn over to the county for delinquent collection. The county, if you don't pay those in time, the county sheriff comes knocking on your door, and that's not a pleasant visit, I imagine. But that's the delinquent real estate tax. Earnings on investments would be just like your bank account. You put money in, bank gives you interest. Same thing here, interest on investments. Athletic event admissions, that's for basketball games, football games, those athletic events where we assess a fee for entrance. Athletic participation fee, that's a fee that's assessed to students who participate in PIAA teams and cheerleading. IDEA is the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act. This is actually federal money that originates in the federal government, but because the way it's funneled through the system to the state and then through the local intermediate units to school districts, it's recorded as a local revenue. Facility rentals, that's money that we generate by renting our facilities. Tuition payments are for various activities such as summer school, student driver training, you can see there, and also tuition that we receive. We host classrooms that are run by the local intermediate unit, and students, there are students in those classrooms. When the students go into some of our, say they go into an art class, for instance, we can assess tuition on that because that's our own local program. So we generate some tuition monies through those item programs. Revenue from community service activities, we don't have any of these at present, but that's when you have adult education classes, for instance, open your gym facilities for evening recreation, and you would assess a fee. That's considered community service activities. And then finally, miscellaneous would be anything that doesn't fall into one of those other categories: tobacco violations, tax certification fees, etc. So that's an overview of the local revenues, to sort of help you understand and start to get a feel for what the revenues are that we generate from local sources. Here you can see the budget figures for the current year, 2015, 2016, as well as the projected revenues for 2016, 2017. And here are some more. What I'll do is I just want to show you, board members, on your presentation, there'll be a narrative, and when we get to that, I may flip back to these screens for the audience to look at. But I want to go through some more detail about the local revenue. Real estate taxes, I think it's becoming more common for people to understand this concept of the Act 1 index. So a school district, as of 2006, can only increase real estate taxes by an index, which is calculated at the state level. It's a formula. They use two components, which I don't expect you to remember, but it's a statewide weekly wage rate and the consumer price index. Two economic indicators that they use to generate or calculate the statewide index. The statewide Act 1 index is then modified based on local school district wealth to come up with your local index. What you see on here on the third column from the left is the local index for Montoursville Area School District for the years listed there. You can also see the millage rate that was assessed in each one of those years to give you a sort of a millage rate history. On the right, I have a note talking about the Act 1 index. On November 10, 2015, I apologize that I'm reading to you, but just to make sure we hit this and make it clear. On November 10, 2015, the board adopted the 2016-2017 real estate tax increase resolution. What that resolution does is it limits the increase to the index. What that means is if you take your current real estate millage rate, multiply it by the index, for 2016-17, it's 3.1%. You get the maximum increase, which you can see, I think I have a pointer over here. Oh, there we go. What you can see is 0.44. You add the 0.44 to the current year rate to get your maximum rate of 14.65. So sort of coming back to the budget, talking more about the actual revenues. In current real estate taxes, the increase that you saw a few minutes ago there on the screen, we had a significant amount of new assessment, new property value coming online. One of the big ones, I don't know if people are familiar with the new FedEx distribution facility that's down near the Wycoming Mall, Blaise Alexander Chevrolet, but that is a significant, brings a significant value, brings significant property value, as well as assessment and then tax to the school district. So that's one of the areas of growth that we see. But if you add that up all over the district, we call that the aggregate increase in assessed value. That increase generated, okay, so that has nothing to do with an increase in tax rate. It's just new assessment, new value, increased value coming online during the year. That amount generated $115,990. Then the next piece of the real estate tax projection for next year is the millage rate increase from 14.21 mils to 14.53 mils. That's the .32 we talked about, that was part of the funding plan for the high school. That generates $247,000. If you remember on the previous slide, we talked about the maximum rate was 0.44, and the proposal, or what's included in this first draft, is 0.32. So as you can see, we have not gone up to the maximum real estate assessed millage rate that's permitted by law. So we're below that. We're at the amount that was proposed for the funding plan. And then finally, there's this $511,250. What that represents is, in the previous year budget, that was money we received from the state as state revenue that we reduced our real estate tax. Okay, so when you looked at the previous year, let's just go back there. Okay, so when you look at the previous year, this $10,320,000 and change, that was reduced by this $511,000. It's in this number, okay? Now, more than likely, we're going to get that $511,000 again this year, which will reduce the number for this year, which is going to, our increase is going to be more like $400,000, $300,000. But given the timing, the Department of Education and the module that we have to plug our budget into, they won't allow us to plug that number in until the official word is given by the state. So it creates this little bit of, okay, well, why? Looks like a pretty big increase, but a little bit of that sort of a false sense of increase. And I'll show you the flip side of that on the state revenue in a few minutes. Okay, so again, that was the $511,000, and we'll see the state revenue. When we get back to that, I'll sort of roll it back in and remind you of this. Okay, so everybody always asks, in terms of okay, there's a 0.32 mil increase. What does that mean to me? What does that mean to us, to my assessed value? What does it mean to me in terms of taxes? So $32, or 30.32 mils on every $100,000 of real estate assessed value is $32. So if you have the ideal $100,000 assessed property, you would pay an additional $32 next year over the current year. And you can see what the total here would be. The total tax would be $14.21, additional $32, $14.53 next year. When I take all of the assessed values in the school district, line them up, and find the average property value in the district is $117,384. And the tax on that average home, if you will, that ideal average in the school district, is right here, $1,688.03, and with the 0.32, it would go up to $1,705.59. The earned income tax was the other thing that we saw increase on that chart earlier. And earned income tax is difficult to predict because it's levied on wages, and wages are sort of driven by economy and employment. And not only is it driven by those things, but also the way it's funneled back to the school district, there's a lag between collection and remittance to the school district. So right now, while we're 9 months into our fiscal year, we're only about 7 months of collection. Not only do we only have 7 months of collection, but we also don't have the months that are after the filing deadline of April 15th. So as you can see, when you start to compound these things, it becomes difficult to see patterns or trends, or, okay, well, we've been at X level for 3 or 4 years, but where are we going to be next year? Again, it's difficult to predict, but based on trend, based on history, based on what we've seen, we feel we're comfortable increasing that from $3.4 million in the current year to $3.5 million for next year, which is a $100,000 increase in that revenue line. Okay, before we move on to the state revenue question check, does anybody have any questions? Okay. Going too slow, too fast, just right? Just right. Over here, just right. In terms of state revenue, there, again, just like in local, you have a number of breakdowns. You have the basic instructional subsidy. This is the biggest chunk of money that we get from the state. It's sort of like the basic education funding, if you will. Next, we have special education subsidy, which is money beyond the basic instructional subsidy to help fund special education needs. I guess a couple of editorial comments about those two. A few years ago, the legislature put together a commission to look at special education funding, and then a year later they looked at basic instructional funding. For many years, there hasn't been a formula to drive out those dollars. So it's really been what you got last year times a percentage. Again, a few years ago, they put together a commission to look at this, and for special education, they put together a formula that actually drives it out based on some measure of data for your school district. Same thing with the basic instructional subsidy. There was a commission, and they put together a formula, but that formula hasn't been used yet. So when you hear about the governor approved the budget, but didn't approve the appropriation process, didn't approve how it was going to be appropriated, there's a bit of a, I don't want to call it a battle, but a disagreement. The governor says, hey, we should use this new formula that's been developed, and the legislature saying, well, we just want to distribute this based on previous year times percentage. So right now, we really don't know how that money is going to be distributed. We know it's been approved to distribute it, but until there's the appropriations piece that talks about how that's going to be distributed, we won't know how much we're going to get. So again, so now it looks like there will be formulas for these two items. Transportation subsidy is not only is it a formula, but it's based on actual costs from the prior year. So in 2016-17, we'll receive funding from the state, a transportation subsidy, but it will be based on our actual costs in the current year, 2015-2016. Rental and sinking fund payments is money that we receive back. We've had a lot of talk about this over the last several months, but this is money that comes back. It's commonly called Plan Con, but this is money that comes back to the school district when you make your debt service payments. So we've had a lot of talk about that. The Plan Con money doesn't all come in, plopped on your desk the day you're done with the project. It comes back in the form of reimbursements. As you make a payment on your debt service, you pay your mortgage, if you will, the state gives you a portion of that back. So you get that over the life of the borrowing, not at the end of the project. Medical and dental services, we received some reimbursement from the state for providing these services to students. State property tax reduction allocation, you may recall I talked about that a few minutes ago. And we'll talk about that. I'll show you the numbers in a minute, and that will make sense. I have a question.
Back to the last. The basic instructional subsidy, the special education subsidy, and the transportation subsidy. Since the governor let the budget go through, those three are guaranteed in some form, right?
So the question is, since the budget, the Commonwealth budget has passed for 2015-16, and that included the basic instructional subsidy, the special education subsidy, the transportation subsidy, that we will receive those monies in some form. And I believe the answer to that is yes. We just don't know what form until the appropriations piece. He vetoed that, so until the legislature regroups and puts something in front of them again, we won't know how that is to be distributed.
Has there been an interruption in Plan Con funding for the existing debt that the district has?
For the existing debt? Yes. So the question is, for the existing debt, are we receiving these rental and sinking fund payments? So the long answer to that is, in the Commonwealth budget for 15-16, there is no line item for Plan Con as a step toward changing the process. So the appropriations bill that the governor vetoed outlined a process for the state levying debt and paying school districts off completely. So instead of us waiting to get that, as I described the process, a lump sum where they will drop the money on your desk and say, here you are, you're paid off. This whole plan-con process that's been in place that, you know, we owe people for the next 20 years, everybody's paid off, and we're starting new, and we're going to restructure how this works. And so the answer is, yes, it's been interrupted. The word that we're getting from lobbyists for organizations like my professional organization say there's a good possibility we will not get that money this year, but it will come next fiscal year, and it will be, you know, you'll get your 2-year payment, but it may come a year later, primarily because of the budget deliberations, I'll call it.
Mr. Salt, the transportation subsidy, is that a straight percentage?
No, the transportation subsidy is based again on the formula. It's a very complex formula.
Okay.
If you ever like to sit and go through it, I can more
No,
than
I just thought maybe it was a straight,
Yeah, no, it's
10%
not.
of your cost.
No, sir, no.
You wish, huh?
Yeah, it would make it easier. Okay, we were on the PA block grants. The block grants have been in place for some time now. They are monies that are often sort of appropriated at the same time as your basic instructional subsidy, but they are for targeted items. And for this year, I'm not aware of any rules that have come out related to block grant fund usage. Again, a lot of times you need to have the money coming before they give you the rules for spending it. So. And then finally, other income from the state. That includes the state reimburses us approximately 50% on FICA taxes we pay for employees, and they pay us, again, approximately 50% on our contributions to the public school employees retirement system for our employees. Here you see again the current year budget projections. They were projections last year, and you see projections for next year. For the current year, we use sort of a best guess. You know, who knew a year ago or a year plus ago that the Commonwealth budget would go this long, and who especially knew how much we were going to get. But we increased that by 2%, and then we have increased it again by 2% for next year for the basic instructional subsidy. If you look at trend or look at history, that's sort of the floor of what we've received each year. While we have increased those, you can see we have not increased the block grant line items. So whether they increase block grant, lessen in subsidy, or, you know, play a shell game there, basically we've budgeted 2% here and nothing down here. Special education, we had budgeted what was recommended, or I don't know if it was the one of the caucuses or the governor that put out some figures, or the Department of Education put out some figures last year. That's what we budgeted. When we look at what's going to be driven out through that special education funding formula, it's actually a bit lower. So you can see if we were using the prior year times percentage, this is probably about what we would have gotten. But if you drive it through the formula that they're now using, it probably looks more like this. Now that's not, I'm not saying they're exact numbers, but it gives you the concept of there's a difference between just using percentage and using funding formula. Transportation, we will know a little later this year what we're actually getting for this year. It's getting back to your question about the formula. It's complex enough that it takes them like almost a year to figure it out, to let you know how much you're going to get. So once we know how much we're getting for this year, it'll give us an idea then of that formula and how it runs through for the following year. So as we move through this budget process, we can fine-tune some of these numbers. Rental and sinking funds, you can see we still have, well, this is what was budgeted for the current year. That's what, based on our existing debt and the formula that they use for reimbursement, that's what we should receive. Now, if they change that methodology and again they drop all the money in our lap, then we'll use that money to pay off debt, and So that all will change. Another question you may have is, well, is this on all of the debt we have now, or is this on part of it? What this represents is the reimbursement on the existing debt, 2014 to 2015A, which was the middle school project. The high school project, the Plancon Part G, has not been approved, processed through yet. So we haven't gotten our what they call our reimbursable rate, the rate where they use that formula to figure out how much we get back. So this is the reimbursement for 2 of the bond notes. Now, once you receive that reimbursable rate, you actually go back and get the reimbursement on any previous payments you've made. So while we have some new debt, we don't lose out because we didn't get the reimbursement at the same time we made the payments. We'll just submit the paperwork later and get caught up at the time that can happen. Medical and dental services, that sort of plugs along around the same amount each year. And then here's what we were talking about earlier. So you can see there's a hole in the state revenue budget, 511,247, and that offsets the real estate increase that you saw. So what will happen is when they say, okay, we're now appropriating this money for next year, and this comes through the gambling funds. This is through a separate avenue, if you will. Even with the state budget being held up this year, because it comes through a different avenue, that money came at the beginning of the year. It wasn't part of the complex negotiations of the state budget. So when they appropriate that money, we'll plug that number in there. It'll look like the increase and decrease will be negligible here, and on the real estate tax side, it will level out. The number will look like what it should look like in terms of increase. Block grants, just a small adjustment for rounding. And finally, other income from the state, that's an increase based on the increased payments to FICA and Social Security. FICA and PESR's retirement contribution. So all of those things I just talked about going down that screen here, they are written out. You have it in your presentation, so when you go home later tonight, you're like, what the heck did he say? It's all written there, you can refer back to it. In terms of federal revenue, there are three sources of federal revenue that we receive here from Torresville Area School District. Title I, Title II, and the PA Medical Access Funding. I'm not going to pretend to know what everything about Title I or Title II, but what I'll tell you is Title I is we use for reading programs here, and Title II we use for class size reduction. Medical access is money that we receive back through Medicaid for providing certain services to students, to eligible students, I should say. Again, you can see, actually, if you look in terms of federal revenue, the total federal revenue that we receive is relatively small in terms of our total budget size. So you can see, again, it's a couple small tweaks there. The 2016-17 budget for Title I is based on the mid-year revision for the current year. So they told us, okay, plan on 195,000. Mid-year, they said, okay, you're going to get 202 and change. So we just project next year based on the current year. Okay, any questions before we move on to good stuff? Okay, the school district's expenditures, we can start to break down into categories. So if they're broad categories, and narrow it down farther and farther and farther. So first, looking at the very broad categories, first you have areas that deal with instruction. I like to refer to instruction as sort of the student in the classroom. You know, what comes in contact with the student in the classroom? You have teachers, aides, certain supplies. That's very generally, that's what instruction is. Support services are those services that support the things that are directly affecting the student in the classroom. That'd be your principals, your superintendent, business office, maintenance department. So anything that supports, again, the teacher affecting the student in the classroom. professional services would be things that neither support or are direct, but things like student activities, community programs that you run, other, as it says, non-instructional programs. And then finally, other expenditures would be things like your debt, various financing measures, things like that. So we'll go through these. As we go through, we'll hit on each of these categories. Now, before I go to the next screen, there are a few things that affect essentially the entire budget. Things like wages, things like healthcare, things like principal's budget allocations. So what we'll do is we'll go through those at the beginning so that as we go through each category of expenditure, I'm not repeating myself quite as much. So the first thing is wage increases. So you can see here in the center column, these were the wage increases for 2015-16. And then on the right column, you see what has been budgeted. In many cases, this is what's in this draft budget. It doesn't mean it's final. The board certainly can choose to change some of these things. In other cases, they're collective bargaining agreements that have been collectively bargained, and you can't just change those. But anyway, so you can see here in that column, what has been budgeted for each of these various classifications or employee groups. So we have an administrative group, professional staff, which is your teachers, supervisory and other salaried wage earners, that's sort of your middle-level supervisory staff. We have a support staff that are within a union, then we have support staff that are not part of the union, and we have other hourly wage earners, front door security, event security, ticket takers, various things. So in terms of the total budget, all the way through, in 2015-16, our wages totaled 12.179 million, we'd say. And in the draft that you're receiving this evening, it's 12.347. So this draft contains an increase over the current year of $168,000, or approximately 1.3%. Just a little bit about staffing in terms of this draft. Okay, what were the staffing levels? What were the concepts or theories that were applied in putting this draft together? This budget actually proposes the reduction of 1.5, what we call them FTEs, full-time equivalents. So that'd be like a person and a half, or a position and a half, if you will. And that's a reduction from the current year, the 15-16 budget. All proposed professional staff or teaching staff replacements are budgeted on the first step of the wage scale. So what we say is, okay, we have a retirement from this person. When we hire somebody, the goal will be to try to hire them on the first step of the scale. That may not always be practical. Sometimes to attract good talent, you need to pay something higher than that. But that's what we do in terms of budget and preparation for the following year. And then all other positions are budgeted based on the existing personnel. So while, for instance, a teaching position or union position is easy to say, okay, well, if we hire somebody new, there's sort of a starting point. Some positions that are vacant this year, there's really no starting point, if you will. It's more what the market demands. So for those positions, at least in this draft, we have just budgeted those with the current personnel moving forward to next year. As we work through this process, there's a better idea of what the compensation is going to be for various areas next year, then those things can be revised. Again, this is a fluid process. In terms of retirement contributions, this is a multi-year challenge, if you will, when it comes to budgeting. Several years ago, when I first started doing this, we had a retirement rate, a contribution rate that was less than 1%. So when I say less than 1%, that's times the salary. So if we go back here to that total wages, at that time it was 1% times that total wage. That's what we paid the retirement system. Then it went up to 5%, and then there was problems, and been jumping by about 4% to 5% per year for the last several years. We knew this was coming, so we put a plan together to help mitigate that. I'll talk about that a little more at the end of the presentation. But just so you understand, when we talk about percent, I don't want to get ahead of myself. We talk about percent, it's 1%, 2%, or in the current year, 25% of that total wage figure. You can see 25% was $3.1 million total, but we get about 50% of that back to the state. So 50% would be about 1.5 million. State would pay that, we pay the other half. Moving forward to next year, it's going from 25.8% to 30.03%, which drives 3.6 million total, or for the school district about 1.8 million. And you can see that the increase burden, if you will, the increased payment from the budget is $278,000. Yeah.
A while back I had talked to you about that, and you said we was getting to a point where it was starting to go the other way, but this shows that this is the opposite. Because you said when they first started, it was a higher percentage,
Right.
and it was going to start going down.
Okay, so the question is, this has been a multi-year issue, and at some point, will there be relief? Right. Okay. And apparently I made a statement that we should be seeing relief. Now, this is what appears to be the sort of peak here, if you will. This is sort of the, yeah. And moving forward, again, I have some slides at the end of the presentation where you can see it visually exactly what's happening here. But yeah, we're sort of at the peak, and this should level off, according to the retirement system's actuaries, this should level off in the mid-30%. So you can see we're at 30 now. If it's going to level off in the mid-30s, we should be 5 percentage points from.
So it's not going to drop.
No.
It's going to level off.
No. So once we hit that mid-30s point, it levels off. It levels off for longer than I'm going to be around. So, and then it will drop off way out at the end, according to the actuaries. But no, it doesn't. It doesn't go up and drop off. It goes up and remains at a level over a period of time.
So the board of directors or trustees, at the end of every year is when they come up with a new percentage.
Yes.
So the question is the Public School Employees Retirement System Board of Trustees. Do they establish this percentage each year? And the answer is yes. They meet in December of each year. They're provided with information from the actuaries saying, here is our performance over the past year, our investment portfolio performance. Here's actuarially, we have this many people retiring, we have this age, so we need this much money to fund the system, and then they set the percentage based on all of that data that they received.
The politicians don't get involved in this too much, right? It's pretty much a set thing. You don't see the politicians getting in there.
So the question is, do you see much political play in this process? The answer is twofold, yes and no. It is setting the rate is strictly a process of the Board of Trustees. So the politicians, although I think there may be a couple of folks on the board who are politically natured. So that's the no part. The yes part is what they have done in the past to give school districts relief is put on what they call collars. So while the data may drive, we need a 10% increase in this rate to get through the next year. I mean, so we don't underfund the system. Legislatively, there was a process put in place where there are collars saying, no, that can't go up any more than 4% per year. And eventually, we'll catch up, we'll get there. So yeah, there has been some legislative play, but not directly in the specific meeting to set.
And it's more math, and you need so much to pay out benefits.
Right.
Math issue.
Correct.
There has been, I've heard talk where they're talking about overhauling the system. Now, what effect is that going to have on it? They still need to have the money, they still need to fund it.
So the question is, there's been talk about a complete overhaul of the public school employees retirement system. I really did not even touch that one, so how can I answer that, dance around it? Yeah, there has been a lot of talk. There have been a lot of brilliant people look at it. There's been a lot of discussion, but nobody seems to have the answer. I don't know if it's a good analogy. It's sort of like Social Security. You need to keep putting money into it to keep it going. So if you change the system, so some of the talk is, okay, let's go to a defined contribution plan. So, you know, employer contributes X amount, that's what you get. Performance is your own, you know, that's on you. Well, if you do that, then you no longer put money into the defined benefit plan. How do the people in the defined benefit plan get their defined benefits? There's no money going into funding. So, so there is a lot of talk. There's no resolution. Okay, another thing that we see across the entire budget is health insurance. This actually was a very good year in terms of health insurance. We purchase our insurance through the Lycoming County Insurance Consortium Pooled Trust. It's a group of school districts here in Lycoming County. In fact, it's all of the school districts in Lycoming County, as well as the LCTC, which George is on the board of, as well as Penn College. So we're self-funded in a, I want to say 6,000 member group, and we have this consortium. The increase in premium for 2016 through 2017 is 3%, which is fantastic. We've had years as high as 24, 25%, but we've had some good years. Actually, I applaud our faculty and the negotiations team in the last negotiations who took a look at a high deductible plan and saw the value in a plan like that, saw that it was good for them, good for the district, good for all stakeholders, and really led the way. They were the first group in this consortium to go to that. And since then, we've seen multiple groups go into that high deductible plan, which is really what is driving this low percentage. You're starting to see consumerism of healthcare, and which is starting to control some costs. So anyway, so 3% for next year. In terms of actual budgetary costs, you can actually see there's a slight decrease. That's sort of a head scratcher. Okay, 3% increase, but you're saying that the budgetary cost decrease. When we budget the actual plan tiers, if you will. So the plan is tiered. If you're a single person, it's one cost. If you're husband and wife, it's another cost. If you're an employee and child, it's another cost. There are 5 tiers. I think they're outlined there. But what happens is, we have somebody retiring, for instance, that's on a family plan, and the replacement might be a single person, so you see cost reduction there. Or somebody who's on the plan may have a spouse that changed jobs, and they get a job that offers a nice health care benefits. They take that health care benefit and waive the health care benefit here at the school district. So from a budgetary standpoint, that will have an effect in changing the budget. So that's why you see a negative. Hopefully that clears up the head scratcher of the 3% versus the 2%. And just a little more, this was a question, excuse me, that I would get quite a bit in the past. Okay, we have some employees who are paying part of the premium for their health insurance. So how do you budget that? Do you budget the full amount of the insurance? Do you budget the net amount? What we budget is the net amount, the actual cost to the school district. So if an employee is co-paying some of the premium, then we net that off from a budgetary standpoint. So we're actually budgeting for actual cost. Another item that affects sort of across the whole budget is the building budget allocations. We used a site-based budgeting methodology where we allocate monies to each building administrator to plan for the operation of their building. Okay, that wouldn't necessarily be like maintenance costs, but that's to buy papers and pencils and buy art room supplies and to pay for field trips in certain cases, to do student of the month, to do all those things that happen in a building. So you can see here that in 2015-16, these were the breakdowns in the total, and in 16-17, here are the breakdowns in the total. We use a formula that's not quite as complex as that transportation formula, but we use a formula that uses a cost per pupil and then drives it out by what we call weighted average daily membership. And what that does is says an elementary student has a certain weight in terms of cost, but a high school student has a greater weight in terms of cost, because in the high school you have electives and you have, a wood shop that has, supplies. And so what it does is it sort of weights the allocation of the funds based on weighted average daily membership, which are recommendations that are put out by the Department of Education. So I said that we'll see the effects of this throughout the budget. Each year, a building administrator may shift money. For instance, this year they may say, hey, we need to replenish a significant number of books in the library. But next year, we need to fund something else, a new piece of equipment in the shop, if you will. So as we go through each individual category, you'll start to see some of this shifting of dollars, and I'll point it out to you, but it's just relatively small amounts that are moving back and forth. And again, it addresses the priorities of the building needs and that the building administrator identifies. Okay, so within that broad, we're sort of back to the broad, instruction, remember that instruction, support, non-instruction, and other uses. So we're back in instruction. And the first category is the regular program. Remember I said instruction is those things that touch the student, but regular program is what you would think of as your regular, K-12, language arts, math, science, sort of your regular program, if you will. Included in that is the Title I program. So those two things are considered a regular program. Here you see the chart of the current year, 2015-16 budget, and then the 2016-2017, and then the increases and decreases in each of those. I'm going to get a paper copy and talk from it. I'm going to try to leave this up for the audience, and I'll talk from the paper copy. Yeah. Okay, so for board members, again, there are notes on the next slide which talk about each of these, but I will leave this one up for the audience to reference when I talk through these. So in the 100, in the salaries, I talked about that. Salaries, you saw the increases projected for the various groups. So that's what's plugged in there in salaries. Employee benefits, again, it's the insurance, it's the retirement, it's those things that are driving that increase. In the 300, 400, 500, and even 600, 700, these areas, that's what I was talking about in terms of the building principals adjusting their budget. So they're shifting monies from year to year. So the reason you have a difference from 15, 16, for instance, here in 400 purchase property services, at 6,000. Next year you have 4980. Again, that's the principal saying, okay, well, we're going to have a little less, need a little less in that area next year, so we'll shift it over here. In the 600 supplies, it's a little bit bigger. I like to talk about some of these things that are bigger. In last year, the request for new textbook series was a little higher than the current year. So this decrease represents less being requested in terms of new textbooks. The next category in instruction is special programs. You can see listed here, this includes things like life skills, deaf or hearing impaired, blind or visually impaired, speech and language, emotional support, autistic support, learning support, gifted, multi-handicap. These are special needs, if you will. So here you can see the chart, the comparison chart for these special programs. Again, in the 100, that's the salaries being driven out by the things we discussed, and employee benefits. In the 300 section, this is services purchased from the Blast Intermediate Unit. So let me take a minute to talk about that. In Pennsylvania, we have support agencies, educational support agencies called intermediate units. Very often help with special education type needs. And so we purchase a number of services through the IU. Very often they will be able to supply, specialized personnel or specialized programs that we may not be able to offer in-house, or they can offer those programs and they can divide them among multiple school districts. So maybe we could hire a person to do that particular item, but we'd be paying one person to do that for one student, where they may be able to consolidate students from 3 or 4 school districts into one classroom, making it a little more economically advantageous. So we purchase these programs. We also purchase other things through the IU. We purchase some technology services. We purchase some like our supervisory personnel, our supervisor of special education. We purchase, we'll hit on some of the other items as we move through the budget. But here, this represents the programs or the things that we purchase specifically related to the special programs. And what happens, the director of special education will evaluate, they'll do what's called a needs assessment. And they'll assess what we're going to need for next year based on our student population. They put together the needs assessment. All the school districts do that and send it to the intermediate unit. And then the intermediate unit starts to build their program for the following year. Okay, we need this staffing, we need this location, we need to put all these things together in order to offer this program to the member school districts. Once they put all that together, they send it back to the school district, and that's our budget essentially for the following year. That tells us, okay, well, here's what it's going to cost us to get all these services that we've requested. That process is underway. It's still in the intermediate unit's hands. They're putting all that together, and we probably won't get the results of the needs assessment in terms of cost and a contract for services for next year until late April, early May, maybe even mid-May at the latest. At that point, we'll have some really good numbers to plug into the budget. We'll sort of know what our costs are going to be, at least from a budget standpoint, for next year. And then what they do, just as an aside, they reconcile that at the end of the beginning year. They look at, okay, you said you were going to use this, but you actually used this. Here's what it cost, and they owe us or we owe them. But there's a reconciliation process that occurs there. But anyway, so how did I come up with this number? $45,000 increase. I just took the existing contract, the existing needs, the existing cost, and multiplied it by 5%. Nothing magic about it, nothing fancy. Maybe it's not even, it's worked in the past, let's put it that way. But really, once that needs assessment is done and we really know what our needs are going to be for next year, what the costs associated with those are going to be, that's when we will be able to fine-tune items like this one right here. Again, going back, like I said, it's a fluid process. I often use, I probably shouldn't get off track here, but I often use an analogy that if you put a picture at the far end of the football field, you start 100 200 yards away, and you start walking toward the picture, that's us walking toward the end of the budget period. So as you get closer, the picture becomes clear. Same thing with the budget. As we get closer to the budget adoption time, the picture will become clearer. We'll have better data to put in here. Vocational education, that is the program that we participate with through the LCTC. Here you can see there's basically one line item, if you will, and that is our cost to the LCTC. Pardon me, just a second. That increase that you see there is driven by a couple of things. One is we increased our projection on the cost per student. Same number of students, 32 students, but at $5,000 per student. And then also, when the LCTC regrouped probably 10 years ago and built a new building on the campus of East Lake Cumming School District, the member districts agreed to share in the debt service for that building. So this increase represents our increase of $1,000 on the debt service for the building, the East Lake Cumming School District that houses the LCTC program.
So,
Yeah.
is the transportation included in that number, or does that go back to the transportation budget? Kids back and forth for use?
The transportation is in the transportation budget, which is coming, it's a support service, if you will, so it's coming a little later.
Thank you.
Sure. Next is other instructional programs. These include driver's education, summer school, homebound instruction, and alternative education. Again, you can see in this area, primarily wages and benefits, things that we've talked about. Now we're moving on to support services. So we talked about instruction and all the things that affect students directly in the classroom. Now it's support services, things that support that. And this pupil personnel services includes guidance, school psychologists, speech and pathology, speech pathology and audiology services. In the 100 category there, you see a decrease. And again, I always think when you see a decrease in the budget, that's something that sticks out and is worthy of discussion. That decrease, we have a guidance counselor retiring this year, as I mentioned earlier. In those positions where we saw those positions that fall under the teacher contract, if you will, where they're retiring, we're plugging them into the next budget at the first step of the scale. So that's why you see a decrease. You take out the retiring teacher's wage, put in the projected new wage, and so that drives out a decrease. And then the increase in employee benefits that we talked about. The 300, again, that's a service. The school psychologist is a service that we purchased through Boston Immediate Unit. So again, that's something that was the current year line item increased by 5%. The next category under support services is instructional staff services. This includes our technology department, school library, curriculum instruction, and staff development. So in terms of salaries, if you look at the employee benefits, the number's sort of big compared to the salaries numbers. That tells me there's something going on in the salary category. What that is in the staff development category, we've reduced the number of substitute days to cover for certain staff development programs. For instance, we tapered off a little bit the next year, and then tapered off because, you know, as time goes by, you're not quite as aggressive. You can meet a little bit less. People are doing things. You can come together, use different technologies. So that's the type of thing where we don't need to pull teachers out of the classroom quite as much, and we don't need substitute needs to cover that. So in the salaries category, that's a reduction in the number of substitute days reported. In the 300, again, that is services we purchased from the last intermediate unit. The 500, you see a decrease there. That is the cost of IT, our IT department communications. And the reason that went down is it now reflects money that we get through the E-rate program. E-rate is paying for the data network, and so that represents a decrease based on the money we're getting from E-rate. And then the 600 and 700, they are shifting within the budget. Let me see what else. Oh yeah, and the 700 is additional costs for our network hardware. So in order to maintain our technology network, our technology infrastructure, this is some essential equipment we need to keep that up and running. Administration services is things like board services or expenses related to board activity, tax assessment and collection services, legal and accounting services, the office of the superintendent, and the office of the principals. This is where you'll find the wages that we pay to board members. You got your checks, right? Okay. Maybe I can get a response on that. But anyway, these are the categories for the administration services. In the 100 and 200 section, we talked about this. These are the things that we've seen. We talked about earlier. The 200 section, that looks a little high in terms of employee benefits, but remember what I talked about in terms of insurance. If you have somebody going from a single plan to a family plan every year, you're going to drive more cost in that category. In the 300 section, in this category, this is related to legal services. There are 2 contracts up for negotiations next year. You extended the Act 93 Administrative Compensation Plan, but that will also be up for discussion next year. So with 3 items on the table, if you will, we put in an extra $10,000 for like a labor negotiations related expenses. The board may choose not to engage those types of services, but I think it would be prudent to budget those. And again, in the following categories, 500, 600, 700, 800, those are shifting of funds in the principal's budgets. The 700 property seems pretty big, but I think it's in the next category you actually see the offset to that, where it was again shifted based on building priority. People health services includes our school nurses at the 4 buildings, the school physician service that we engage, as well as occupational and physical therapy services for students. Again, we talked about 100 and 200, the salaries and benefits. 300 is services. They're the occupational and physical therapy services from the IU. Same methodology, increased 5%. And then, again, supplies. I know some of those supplies numbers are driven by discussions we've had about increasing the number of AEDs in the buildings and throughout the buildings. So I know some of the additional costs, for instance, you're seeing, again, shifting priorities from year to year, but that's one that's been identified for 16, 17. Next category is business services. That's broken down into supervision and fiscal services, other fiscal services, and other support services. Business, they're the categories that the Department of Education has us break the business services into. But collectively, here's the budget for those areas. You can see again, it's the salaries and benefits we've discussed, and really no changes in the other categories. Operation of maintenance and plant services. This includes the supervision of maintenance and plant, the operation of the buildings, care and upkeep of the grounds, as well as safety and security services. So rolled into this would be like our front door security, as well as the cost for our school resource officers. So while it's operation and maintenance and plant, those safety and security type expenses are included in this category. Again, excuse me, salaries and benefits. We've sort of driven that home at this point. And then the other categories, while you see some big numbers here, what this is, for instance, in the 700 property, there was a piece of floor care equipment that was purchased in 15-16. Obviously, it was a one-time purchase, doesn't need to be purchased again. So you see a decrease in that category. So that's why you see these types of changes. Also, some of this has fallen off because of the project here at the high school, where when the budget was built last year, expenses were put in for recurring maintenance, for the potential for repairs that would be needed in the interim. With the project moving forward, we're saying that some of those expenses wouldn't be there that you might otherwise have.
On the third line, second line, what's driving the increase in the employee benefits so on?
Yeah, the question is in the 200 section, what's driving the employee benefits? Without looking specifically at this item, what I can say is it's back to things we talked about. You know that the retirement is driving it to some extent, but you could have had, in fact, I know we hired a new custodian this year that replaced someone. The person that they replaced was a single person on single person coverage. This person has a family, they're on family coverage. So right there, I know that we're driving some cost because of the way we budget those. Sure. Student transportation includes student transportation, operating the vehicles. Now, all of our transportation is contracted out to a third party, to our contractors. But this is, for operation, they still fall into this group. Student transportation monitoring services. We do have pay for some monitors on some of the special needs buses because of the level of need for those students. We have those aids and monitors on the transportation, as well as non-public student transportation services, which are relatively minimal at this time, at this point, but it's still something that the Department of Ed looks for you to have a category and some level of recognizing some level of expense for them. So here you can see relatively minimal increase in this category. What I would say is this is probably a buy year, if you will. I think this is a very reasonable estimate for next year, but probably next year you're probably going to need to enhance this budget a little bit. But I do feel comfortable with this proposal for 16-17. Student activities include two categories. Those are school-sponsored student activities, which include things like your academic decathlon, your student government, FBLA, and then school-sponsored athletics, which are your PIAA athletic teams. Some of your middle and elementary school athletic programs fall into that category as well. salaries and benefits. And then the other categories are really, as you see them, are a shifting of priorities. Needs determined in one area, not in another for the coming year. Okay, interfund transfers out. This is where we record our capital reserve fund transfer. We record our debt service fund transfer. The debt service fund transfer is the money that we use to pay our debt payments, our bond payments. Again, for accounting purposes, we're required to transfer that money from the general fund to what's called a debt service fund and pay it out there. It's really a shell fund. It's on paper, but for accounting purposes, that's how it needs to be reported. So when you're looking for the payment of debt, you have to find this debt service fund transfer, and that's where you're going to find the amount reported for those annual payments. Food service fund transfers, if any, there's none included in this draft budget, but if there were any, it'd be there. And finally, student activity fund transfers. That would be any monies that are contributed, for instance, to the school newspaper or school yearbook to help defray the cost of their operations. So all of those things are aggregated into the 900 section. Again, it's the rules of accounting, and that's where they want to